That, my friends, is known as stereotypical Russian accuracy. Can't hit a stirrer meal 100 meters away, in the wide open, yet. Can hit the hatch of a T-49 moving from over the hill and far, far away. But then you say, Skate, but this is Chinese. This is the WZ112-2. And then I say, yes, it's Chinese in the game. It's Russian, okay? D25TA, the 122mm attached to this tank. It's very Russian. In fact, playing this tank, I sat there thinking, I swear I've played this before. It almost feels like a WZ111. Or no, maybe it was a 112 Glacial. Or maybe it was an IS-3, or an IS-6, or an IS-5. That's it. It was the Object 730. I think the point's fairly obvious by now. It's a Tier 8 Premium Heavy, which we've already got in the game. But what you do is you take said successful recipe of a good Tier 8 tank, and then you adjust it ever so slightly so it's slightly different. You give it a nice pretty camo, and it is a pretty camo. Give it a different name, put it under a different tech tree, and voila! We have said tank. And a recipe for success, because those are all very good Tier 8 premiums. In fact, at one point we would refer to them as overpowered, but because there's so many variants of them now, they kind of fall into the balance. It's quite amusing, actually. If you make everything overpowered, nothing is overpowered anymore. And then people will stop complaining that they're overpowered, and then start complaining there's a small selection of tech tree tanks which have been left behind and are thus underpowered. I am taking the mick for the first 2 minutes of this video a little bit, but it's all very true at the same time. But if I was being serious, and you said, is this worth spending money on crates trying to get it? My answer, honestly, would be of course not. Especially if you have one of the other variants already. But if I was going to take it more serious and break it down a little bit, in this situation I'm in right now, I think any of those other tanks I mentioned would be able to cope here, and would perform just as well. So far I have blocked 3,700 damage, and that's from tanks which are a higher tier than me. But again, that doesn't mean I'm going to go pick one of these things up and start spending money on crates, because those other tanks I think could have done the same in this environment. Truth be told, gone are the days for me where I will just buy every single tank I possibly can as a collector tank, especially when they're in crates. And that's not down to a lack of interest in Blitz or anything like that. Well, let's be serious. How many versions of this type of tank do I need to make credits? If I start to get bored of playing, I don't know, a different type of WZ, I'm not going to go, I fancy playing a different type of WZ. It just won't work like that. But again, I need to reiterate, it's by no means a bad tank. As I've already said, it's a very strong tank. I'm just against the concept of so many variants of the same thing. I mean, in this circumstance, I'm trying to use my Tier 8 heavy tank. We are in a Tier 9 game, but I tried to stick it right at the front. That 3,700 damage I took is damage I took instead of other players on my team taking the damage. So I only did 2,285 damage myself. But I spotted 5, and I bounced over double the amount of hit points my tank has. And because of the accuracy of that gun, this is kind of the environment you need to stick these things in. Trying to play one of these back 200 meters is just... it just doesn't work. I mean, you're not going to hit as reliably, you're not going to perform as reliably, and you're not going to be as useful for your team. Yes, you could argue you'll do more damage by playing further back, but that's a tank destroyer's job. Your job, in a tank like this especially, is to get in their faces, is to get close, is to be the front line. To be the tank at the front of the push. And in that sort of environment, especially when you're going from like ridge to ridge like this, or cover to cover, just poking your turret, you're going to thrive in this tank. I mean, I've pushed to this spot, I'm hiding my hull except for that rock hard turret, and something I want to point out very quickly, that last shot I fired the standard APCR, not HE at that waffle. The reason being, quite simply, is I wanted to make sure I got a hit without sitting around aiming, and because there was obstacles in front of him, if I shot HE, it just would have taken out the fence. At least by firing the standard ammo first, I would have got the shot on, and then the next one hopefully would have been a clear shot with HE. So I just wanted to explain that one. Now, aside from the rock hard turrets, which all these variants have, this thing also has very good frontal armor. It's got 140mm of upper front plate, and it's got 100mm of lower front plate, which, as a comparative, the 112 Glacial has 120, so 20 less, and 80 on the lower, also 20 less. So you could argue this thing has more advantages than the Glacial. It's also got a better top speed. It's got 42km top speed in comparison to the 32 on the Glacial. The Glacial, however, has 240mm of frontal turret armor. This thing has 195. The Glacial also has a slightly better traverse speed. In other words, it's a tit-for-tat thing. This thing has slightly better frontal armor, but it loses a bit of traverse speed, and the turret technically isn't as strong, but due to its shape, you're not really going to find it gets penetrated more than the Glacials. So the turrets, I would say, are on par due to shape and thickness. It's just slight variations in the hull. The gun is effectively identical. It literally is identical to both the 111 and the 112. Slightly different from the other versions, but ridiculously slightly different. Personal choice, I like to side scrape it up like this, because with its 120mm of side armor, it's very tough. And it takes one hell of a beating at this sort of angle. Now you can, due to that thickness and due to how far forward the turret is, poke it round, angled, and keep the track wheel hidden. As a personal thing, I find the side scraping position more successful and more reliable in this thing. I'd say more than anything, side scraping is more consistent, and if you already have one of the others, you're used to doing this sort of style from the other ones anyway. And again, by knowing how to side scrape these things, you can then reverse side scrape them as well, which is very, very effective. And it's very handy when tanks pop up on the opposite side of you, because your armor predominantly is facing them already. If I was side scraping normally, then that shot I virtually guaranteed would have penetrated me, because I would have had to try and turn my entire tank around. Yet in that scenario, all I had to do was turn my turret, not my entire hull. But again, just to reiterate, I could have done exactly the same thing in a Glacial. In fact, you could even argue you could do it better, because you can traverse that little bit quicker. So you can see what I mean. It's hard to argue one's better than the other, and it's hard to argue that, oh, this is a more overpowered version. It's not. It's the same sort of thing, just ever so slightly different. And I dread to think how many times I've said that in this video. But I think it's so essential to hit that point home, because otherwise, if you don't know and you're looking at this and the lack of information sometimes in the adverts, you might just spend the money on the crates when you've got the same thing already sitting in your garage, which cost a lot less. But either way, it's not going to be something you're disappointed with, not in any shape or form. It is a brilliant tank. And categorically, I won't be gambling on getting it, and the reason for that being is I've already got it. I've got several versions of it, under several different nations. And I think I will leave that as the closing statement of the description on this tank. Quick look at the results screen. We did 4,400 plus damage. We were bottom tier, which means the shots we made on higher tier tanks counted for a little bit more XP. Without running a premium account, I made 53,000 credits profit. If I was running a premium account, that would have been just over 100,000 credits. But that's it. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.